Good evening, horror enthusiasts, and welcome to Midnight Horror, your ultimate destination for spine-chilling tales and supernatural encounters. Tonight, we delve into the dark and twisted story of Mason, a man whose quest for success leads him into a nightmare beyond his wildest fears. In this haunted mansion, secrets lurk in every shadow, and the past refuses to stay buried. Join me as we unravel the eerie events that turned Mason's life upside down, encountering vengeful spirits, terrifying apparitions, and a curse that binds the living to the dead. So, dim the lights, grab your favorite blanket, and prepare yourself for a journey into the heart of horror. This is Midnight Horror, and tonight's tale will leave you questioning the boundaries between reality and the supernatural. Let's begin. Mason's life had been in a downward spiral for weeks, but tonight, something truly sinister was unfolding. It was a moonless night, the kind of darkness that seemed to swallow everything whole. Mason lay on the creaky bed of the old mansion he now called home, unable to sleep. The silence was almost oppressive, as if the house itself was holding its breath. A faint creak from the hallway jolted him awake. Mason sat up, his heart pounding in his chest. He listened intently, straining to hear over the rush of blood in his ears. There it was again, a soft, almost imperceptible sound of a door creaking open. Mason's throat went dry. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his bare feet touching the cold, hardwood floor. Grabbing his phone, he turned on the flashlight and carefully opened his bedroom door. The hallway was pitch black, but the beam from his phone cut through the darkness. Right outside his door, lying innocuously on the floor, was a crisp $100 bill. Mason frowned, picking it up. Who would leave money here, and why? As he straightened up, the light revealed two more bills further down the hallway, leading towards the living room. Cautiously, Mason followed the trail, his mind racing with questions. He picked up the second bill, then the third, each one adding to his unease. When he reached the living room, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Hanging from the ceiling by a thick old rope was a noose, swaying gently as if recently disturbed. Suddenly, a noise behind him made Mason spin around, his flashlight sweeping across the room. For a moment, he saw nothing but shadows, but then he caught a glimpse of someone, moving just out of sight. He froze, heart hammering in his chest, as the darkness seemed to close in around him. "Mason," a voice whispered, barely audible. He turned back towards the noose, but it was gone, leaving only an empty space. Mason's breath came in short gasps as he backed away, stumbling over his own feet. He fled back to his bedroom, slamming the door shut behind him. He sat on the edge of his bed, the flashlight shaking in his hand. It was just a nightmare, he told himself. Just a nightmare. But the terror felt all too real. The next morning, Mason awoke with a start, the events of the night before still vivid in his mind. He checked his phone and saw a message from a potential buyer wanting to view the house. Relief washed over him, temporarily pushing aside his fear. Maybe selling this house would finally put an end to his misery. Mason quickly got dressed in his best suit, determined to make a good impression. He rehearsed his sales pitch in front of the mirror, trying to ignore the lingering sense of dread. The house needed to be sold, and he needed the commission more than ever. He stepped out into the hallway, half expecting to see more money or that ominous noose, but everything seemed normal in the harsh light of day. The first potential buyers were a young couple. Mason greeted them with his most charming smile, leading them through the house and highlighting its best features. As they entered the living room, Mason couldn't help but glance at the spot where the noose had been. There was nothing there now, no sign of the horror he had witnessed. The couple seemed genuinely interested, and Mason began to relax. But as they inspected the fireplace, the husband suddenly jerked back with a yelp. Bones, small and animal-like, tumbled out from the hearth, scattering across the floor. The wife screamed, and Mason quickly tried to downplay the situation, claiming it must have been a prank by the previous owners. Despite his reassurances, the couple's interest waned. They continued the tour, but their enthusiasm had clearly diminished. In the kitchen, Mason discreetly kicked a stray knife back under the cabinet, wondering how it had gotten out in the first place. When they reached the bedroom, the wife stopped suddenly, staring at the wall. Mason followed her gaze and saw faint handprints, smudged and ghostly, trailing across the wallpaper. The couple left in a hurry, their excuses flimsy and unconvincing. Mason watched them drive away, frustration boiling inside him. He had come so close to sealing the deal, but the house seemed determined to sabotage him. He called Jeff, the man who had hired him, and angrily recounted the bizarre occurrences. Jeff's response was unsettlingly calm. "Yeah, the house has a bit of a history," he admitted. "A few accidents, maybe a murder or two. Nothing major. Just sell the house, Mason. You've got no other choice." Mason hung up, feeling more trapped than ever. The old mansion, with its creaking floors and whispering walls, was more than just a job now. It was a prison. He needed to find a way out, but the only escape lay in selling the house. And to do that, he would need to confront whatever darkness lurked within its walls. Determined, Mason set to work cleaning up the mess. He swept up the bones, scrubbed the handprints from the walls, and made sure every knife was securely locked away. As night fell, he fortified himself with a stiff drink, sitting in the living room and waiting for something to happen. Hours passed in silence. Mason's eyes grew heavy, and he found himself dozing off, only to be jolted awake by a sudden, sharp noise. The sound of a door slamming echoed through the house, followed by a faint whisper that sent shivers down his spine. He grabbed his flashlight and ventured out into the hallway once more. The source of the noise seemed to be the basement door, which now stood ajar. Mason hesitated, every instinct telling him to turn back. But he couldn't afford to let fear control him. He needed to know what was going on in this house. Taking a deep breath, he descended the creaky stairs into the basement. The air grew colder with each step, the darkness thick and suffocating. Mason's flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the damp stone walls. As he reached the bottom, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A row of old wooden coffins, their lids askew. Before he could react, the flashlight died, plunging him into complete darkness. Panic surged through him as he fumbled with the device, but it refused to turn back on. The whispering started again, closer this time, and Mason felt a chill run down his spine. "Mason," the voice hissed, and he spun around, trying to pinpoint its source. In the faint, ambient light filtering down from the stairway, he saw a figure, a woman, pale and ghostly, her eyes filled with sorrow. She reached out a hand and Mason stumbled back, his foot catching on something. He fell, hitting the cold, hard ground. The impact knocked the breath out of him, and for a moment, he lay there, stunned. When he looked up, the ghostly figure was gone. Mason scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding. He needed to get out of there. He rushed up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind him. Breathing heavily, he leaned against the door, trying to collect himself. This house was haunted. There was no other explanation. But he couldn't leave. Not yet. In the following days, Mason continued to show the house to potential buyers, each encounter more unnerving than the last. Strange noises, moving objects, and ghostly apparitions seemed determined to drive him mad. Yet he persisted, driven by desperation and the hope of freedom. One evening, as he sat in the living room, his phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number, and it contained several photos of the house, each one more disturbing than the last. Blood smeared on the walls, broken furniture, and in two of the photos, what appeared to be dead bodies. Mason's hands shook as he scrolled through the images. Someone was toying with him, trying to scare him away. But who? And why? He decided to confront the source of his torment. Armed with a flashlight and a newfound resolve, he searched every inch of the house, looking for clues. In a small storage room, Mason found an old journal hidden behind a loose brick. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded, but still legible. As he read, a chilling story unfolded, a tale of jealousy, betrayal, and murder. The mansion had once belonged to a wealthy family, torn apart by greed and hatred. The spirits of the wronged and the vengeful still lingered, unable to move on. Mason felt a pang of sympathy for the ghosts that haunted the house, but he also felt a renewed determination. He had to find a way to put them to rest, to free both them and himself from this nightmare. The journal mentioned a ritual, a way to cleanse the house and banish the spirits. Over the next few days, Mason gathered the necessary items for the ritual, following the instructions carefully. As night fell, he began the ceremony, chanting the ancient words and lighting the sacred candles. The air grew thick with tension, the shadows in the room seeming to writhe and twist. Mason was jolted awake by the sound of a door opening and discovered a $100 bill lying at the entrance to his bedroom. Turning on his flashlight, he saw 2 more bills further down the hallway. As he followed the trail into the living room, a noise from behind made him freeze. Slowly, Mason turned around. Mason had once been a highly successful used car salesman, though his methods were less than honorable. He used flowery language to deceive customers and even resorted to forging documents. In his relentless pursuit of closing deals, Mason spared no unethical means. But bad deeds eventually catch up. Just today, after sealing a deal through deceit, Mason was summoned to his boss's office. It turned out he had sold 2 faulty cars at high prices to disabled customers. The government had contacted the company, demanding an explanation and threatening to shut them down if not handled properly. Seizing the opportunity, Mason's boss, already displeased with his unethical methods, fired him on the spot. From a top salesman, Mason found himself unemployed overnight. But his misfortunes didn't end there. Returning home dejected, he realized he had forgotten his anniversary with his girlfriend. She, fed up with his constant work and lack of attention, refused to hear any of his excuses and kicked him out. Homeless, Mason had no choice but to sleep in his old car. Despite his dire situation, Mason remained confident in his future, believing his skills would soon land him another job. However, Mason's notoriety in the industry made finding a new job impossible. No company wanted to hire someone with such a tainted reputation. Out of options, he called friends for help, hoping at least to find a place to stay, but even they turned him down. Just as despair was about to overwhelm him, Mason spotted a recruitment notice on a tree, a lifeline in his dark times. The job interview went surprisingly well. The recruiter, Mr. Jeff, didn't care about Mason's stained past. What mattered to him was whether Mason could sell houses. Mr. Jeff had several properties that wouldn't sell, offering high commissions and temporary housing until they were sold. For a man in Mason's desperate situation, it was a godsend. Without hesitation, Mason drove to the house he chose to sell, a mansion on the outskirts. Though old on the outside, it was spacious and well-furnished inside. Lying on the large, comfortable bed, Mason couldn't help but feel elated. Not only did he have a place to stay, but he also stood to earn a significant commission once the house sold. He began cleaning the house meticulously, from top to bottom, and took several photos to post online. Everything was ready. All that was left was for potential buyers to come. However, when Mason reviewed the photos, he noticed a shadowy figure in one corner. The knife in the cupboard seemed to have moved on its own, and the bathroom curtain bore several eerie handprints. But Mason, immersed in his newfound happiness, paid no heed to these unsettling details. After rehearsing his sales pitch in front of the mirror, he lay down and drifted into a deep sleep. In the middle of the night, Mason was once again woken by the sound of a door opening. He found a $100 bill outside his room. Shining his flashlight down the hallway, he discovered 2 more bills. Reaching the living room, he was greeted by a more startling sight, a noose hanging from the ceiling. Suddenly, a sound behind him made him freeze. He turned around, but thankfully it was just a nightmare. The fear from the nightmare was quickly dispelled by a text message from a potential buyer. Dressing in his best suit, Mason prepared to welcome the clients with the professionalism of a top salesman. But as he was practicing his pitch, 2 knives slid out from the cupboard, startling him. Despite the oddities, Mason pushed them aside, focusing on the task at hand. When the clients arrived, Mason greeted them with a confident smile and began the tour. However, strange things started happening. Animal bones fell from the fireplace, and the knives reappeared, moving on their own. The clients were spooked, but Mason managed to come up with convincing explanations. As they reached the bedroom, the clients froze in horror. Mason turned to see chairs, which he had just tidied, inexplicably blocking the door. Terrified, the couple fled without looking back. Frustrated, Mason called Mr. Jeff and recounted the bizarre incidents. Mr. Jeff nonchalantly admitted that the house had a history of murders, making it difficult to sell. However, the contract Mason signed stated clearly that he was an independent contractor. Until the house was sold, he couldn't escape. Speechless, Mason realized he had been played. What seemed like a great opportunity was a trap. Now his only option was to sell the house quickly to gain his freedom. He cleaned up the animal bones, rearranged the chairs, and tied the cupboard doors shut, preparing for the next potential buyers. That night, as Mason sat in the park talking to his girlfriend on the phone, he received a text message. It contained several photos of the house, each room covered in blood. 2 photos even showed dead bodies. Furious, Mason rushed back to the house, inspecting every room with a mop in hand, but found nothing. In his rage, he lashed out at the mop, feeling utterly defeated. Suddenly, he heard someone calling his name. Following the voice to the storage room, Mason encountered another nightmare. Before he could recover, a new set of clients arrived. He quickly tidied up and went to greet them. However, this couple seemed odd. But Mason didn't care. As long as they were potential buyers, they were welcome. Mason led the couple on a tour, expertly showcasing the house. But the couple's behavior grew increasingly strange. They seemed familiar with the layout of the house, and when Mason showed the woman the bedroom, she suddenly broke down, claiming her husband mistreated her and begging Mason to help her escape. Mason was bewildered and speechless. He only wanted to sell the house and avoid any personal entanglements. The woman didn't press further, leaving with a strange smile. Mason quietly followed her. This time, he was so scared, he wet his pants and ran out of the house, hiding in his car. He searched for information about the house's past and, to his shock, discovered that the couple were among the victims who had died there. It seemed he had genuinely encountered ghosts. In a panic, Mason posted online, hoping to find someone with special abilities to help him. Soon, a woman named Clara contacted Mason. However, she admitted she wasn't an exorcist, but could act as an intermediary to help Mason identify the ghosts. Afterward, Mason would have to negotiate with them himself. If negotiations failed, he would have to burn down the house. Though he had found some help, Mason still felt uneasy. He secretly bought various items to ward off evil spirits, placing them all over the house. Clara dismissed his efforts, saying he was naive. Such things were just for decoration and had no real effect, as seen in horror movies. After asking Mason about the phenomena he had witnessed, Clara began the ritual to communicate with the spirits. Mustering all his courage, Mason spoke to them as if dealing with potential buyers. But these entities were not easy to deal with. Clara, true to her word, couldn't exorcise the spirits. Instead, she became possessed. Upon hearing Mason's determination to sell the house, she suddenly flew into a rage, screaming threats to kill him. Mason had no choice but to defend himself with a broken mop handle. Now, Mason, already a failure, was about to become a murderer. After a fierce internal struggle, Mason made the only decision that seemed beneficial to him: to dispose of the body. Just as he finished packing Clara's body and was about to leave, Mr. Jeff appeared, saying he wanted to inspect the house. Mason was extremely tense, fearing Mr. Jeff might discover evidence of his crime. But whether intentionally or not, Mr. Jeff missed the clues several times. After Mr. Jeff left, Mason immediately drove to the outskirts to bury the body. Despite his actions, Mason felt no relief. Instead, he was consumed with guilt. He had become a murderer, something even he couldn't accept. He drove to his girlfriend's house, seeking comfort, only to witness her happily embracing another man. Completely devastated, Mason saw the noose hanging from the ceiling once again. This time, he didn't feel fear. Calmly, he stepped toward it and slipped the noose around his neck. Just as he decided to end it all, he woke up from another nightmare. Mason was no longer afraid of the house, but as he quietly cleaned the bloodstains, another potential buyer arrived. After confirming the visitor was alive, Mason invited him in. He had given up on selling the house. To his surprise, the man named Jim expressed great satisfaction with the house and offered to pay immediately. Mason's mood shifted. He could finally rid himself of this demonic burden. However, Clara's ghost seemed to disdain his actions. Mr. Jeff quickly organized a company meeting, praising Mason and awarding him the promised hefty commission. As Mason reveled in his success at selling the seemingly unsellable house, Mr. Jeff revealed a harsh truth. The house's contract was cursed. The curse could only be lifted when a new resident took the place of the previous one, perpetuating the cycle. Mason's sale had nothing to do with his selling skills. It was Clara's death that facilitated it. Troubled by this revelation, Mason began to worry about Jim's safety. He called to warn Jim, suggesting he find an exorcist. When Mason heard a child's voice over the phone, he realized Jim had moved in with his daughter. Panicked, Mason couldn't bear the thought of a child being endangered by his selfish actions. He rushed back to the house, desperate to check for any signs of danger. Jim, though skeptical, allowed Mason to search. Mason and Jim, with the light suddenly going out, frantically ran upstairs to find Jim's daughter. Thankfully, she was safe, but pointed fearfully at the closet. Mason, terrified, recited prayers of repentance. It seemed Clara only wanted to scare them. Barely escaping the room, Mason realized the real threat awaited them downstairs. As they fled through the back door, they discovered Jim had been possessed by a demon. Determined to save innocent lives for once, Mason bravely confronted the demon. He threatened it with a lighter, negotiating Jim and his daughter's release. Jim cooperated, throwing a gasoline can on the ground. Faced with Mason's resolve, the demon had no choice but to comply. With nothing left to lose, Mason headed toward the noose once more. Not long after, new sales agents brought prospective buyers to the house. Strange occurrences frightened them, making them run out in tears. But this time, the pranksters included Mason and Clara. And so, dear viewers, we reach the end of Mason's chilling tale, a story of ambition, greed, and the supernatural forces that lie just beyond our understanding. Mason's journey serves as a haunting reminder that sometimes the real monsters are the ones we create ourselves. If you enjoyed tonight's episode and want to join us for more spine-tingling stories, be sure to hit that like button. Your support helps keep the darkness at bay and allows us to continue bringing you these terrifying tales. Don't forget to subscribe to Midnight Horror and click the bell icon so you'll never miss an episode. With the notification bell turned on, you'll be the first to know when we uncover another mystery or encounter the unknown. Thank you for joining me tonight. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, the next nightmare could be just around the corner.